she's been with me.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Tom Edge. I will be presenting service today along with Tom Edge. I know. Tina Jones and Steve Israel are providing technical assistance, and Ted Goldman is our musical director. This service is going to be using a format we're calling service-lite, which means fewer readings, usually, and more emphasis on discussing a topic. Usually there will be a brief presentation about the topic prior to discussion. We will still light the chalice, sing songs, and have time for joys and concerns. Please be aware we are recording the service, and it will be posted on our YouTube page. For privacy, we do pause recording during joys and concerns. Please remember to put your phones on Do Not Disturb, thank you. And also at the end of service, after we extinguish the chalice, we will have time for announcements. We join together this morning to seek justice, equality, and fairness in the world. Our hearts are touched by the human need we feel around us, whether far away or within reach of our hands. We come here to be together because this is how we believe our lives are best lived, in questioning and in conversation, in compassion and in service, in gratitude and in joy, in companionship and in love. It is good to be together with you this morning. If this is your first service at MVUUC, please note we are a diverse group with varying interests and beliefs, and our services are varied in format, tone, and topic. We encourage you to attend or view several services to gain a good understanding of our congregation. Also, please complete a blue information card located in the back pocket on these chairs, and answer, so we can learn about you and then answer any questions you might have. Thank you very much, Megan. Please leave completed cards at the assistance table at the back of the sanctuary or on the greeting table out front. If you'd like to receive our weekly email newsletter, which is the best way to stay current on events at MVUUC, please email us at news, that's NEWS, at MVUUC.org. Please take a moment to think of all your friends at MVUUC, greet them here in person or with a comment in the chat box. Let us support one another. The chalice will be lit today by Megan Rancier. Please join me in reading these words by Reverend Lori Gorgas-Halaban for the lighting of the chalice. They appear as a comment in the chat box. We light our chalice flame for those who live their lives in closets of shame, for those who furtively visited the bars where nobody knew your name, for the Stonewall riot and the fierce trans women who fought, for the plague which still takes far too many, too young, too soon. So many gone, so many never lived to see, out gay kids singing on TV, out gay people serving in the military, marriage equality, families formed by intention, We light our chalice flame for all these and for all our siblings of the rainbow, surviving, living life out in the open with pride. And for our first musical selection, I'll now turn it over to Ted.
You just need to follow me on this one. I'm on my way. I'm on my way to the freedom land, to the freedom land. You can just look at me. I'm not going to change it around anyway, so you don't need what's up there. I'm on my way. I'm on my way to the freedom land, to the freedom land. I'm on my way. I'm on my way to the freedom land, to the I'm on my way. I'm on my way. I asked my neighbor, come and go with me. I asked my kids, come and go with me. I asked my parents, come and go with me. I'm on my way. I'm on my way. If they say no, I'm gonna go anyway. If they say no, I'm gonna go anyway. If they say no, I'm gonna go anyway. They say no, I'm on my way. I'm on my way. I'm on my way. If they say no, I'm gonna go anyway. I asked my siblings, come and go with me. I'm on my way. I'm on my way.
Our opening words today are from the Reverend Zeb Green. It was my first Sunday in the pulpit of the congregation that I serve. I'm not typically a worship leader and felt particularly nervous this Sunday, not because of preaching, but because it was my first time taking a public role while wearing a skirt and presenting as more feminine. I was raised as a boy. People look at me and see a strong, healthy young man. I have an invisible disability and am gender non-conforming, however. And people get very uncomfortable when what they see doesn't match their expectations. I was also raised with the Southern conservative teaching that church is about conformity, fitting in, and being respectable. Anything that could make people uncomfortable, ask questions, or draw any scrutiny was not allowed in church. As a sidebar, he notes, thank the heavens that I haven't attended a church like that in decades. I still come to church with a voice ringing, don't rock the boat. Be who they want you to be. That voice and conditioning are at odds with everything the faith traditions that I love tell me about myself and my relationship with the divine. The challenge I face is to share the authentic and sacred truth inside of me. That morning, I began the service with, my name is Zeb Green. My pronouns are they, them. I've got my scraggly beard, brand new skirt, and cute scarf. and I am here to share a word or two about love. It's just who I am. At coffee hour following the service, one of the youth came over to me and said with so much pride, "I'm a they, them too, and my brother is a he, him." I would have loved it as a kid to have a church that encouraged us to listen to our heartfelt yearning of self, to express ourselves with authenticity, and had adults who modeled those behaviors for us. That's why I work past the inner voice. That's why I risk uncomfortable situations, strange looks, questionable comments about wearing a kilt, and the microaggressions as people figure it all out. Trans and non-binary people are under attack in this country. The pressure for all of us, especially our youth, to hide our true selves is immense. I'm so glad that we have faith traditions that embrace multiple paths through life. I'm grateful that I risked scrutiny to appear as my true self, and deeply touched that in doing so, I was able to affirm the journey of my congregation's youth. Before I begin my reflection, I would like to share a short video looking at one of the pioneers of modern movements for LGBTQ+ equality. Following my talk, I would love to hear your reactions to the video. But I would also like you to think about two other things. First, are there topics related to LGBTQ+ identities that you would like us to explore in more depth in future services? And what do you think we could do as a congregation that we're not already doing to help demonstrate our solidarity with these communities? With that, let us begin with the video, The Grandfather of the Queer Liberation Movement.
I can thank Frank Kameny for recognizing that we're here and we're queer and we deserve our rights. Frank Kameny was a Harvard-trained astronomer with a PhD in astrophysics who was working for the U.S. Defense Department, helping build space systems for what would soon become NASA. But then the Army found out that he was gay. He had been arrested with another man in a public restroom in San Francisco and very quickly lost his job. And what made him different was he was the first of the victims of the Lavender Scare, as we now call it. He was the first to fight back. At the same time that Senator McCarthy was pursuing alleged communist and security risks within the State Department and the federal government, he and his allies were also pursuing sexual deviance at a rate even higher than they were going after alleged communists. So they argued that if you were queer and working for the federal government, not only were you just immoral, you were also a security risk, because if you were queer, then you were necessarily secretive about your condition, as they would call it. And so that meant that Soviet agents, for example, could then use that secret against you to acquire classified information. He was the first to file a suit against the federal government and its discriminatory policies, and he would go on to create Washington's first gay lobbying group, the Mattachine Society of Washington.
After I got going on the whole gay movement thing, which was starting in any formal sense in 1961, when I founded the Mattachine Society of Washington here and got into other things, and we took on the government. Eventually, I became the authority in the country on security clearances for gay people and military cases. And I have mounds and mounds and mounds of files at home, case after case after case. In those days, you got either a dishonorable discharge or an undesirable discharge. And so I used to fight a large number of cases of people being threatened with that kind of discharge.
Frank Kameny turned to the Black Freedom Movement and saw what the NAACP was doing, what folks like Bayard Rustin was doing with his March on Washington in '63, and started adapting them for this new fledgling movement called the homophile movements. The next year, the homophile movement begins marching. Frank Kameny begins marching with his organization outside the White House, outside the Defense Department, outside the State Department. The problem was the homophile movement wasn't making space for those who existed at the intersection of those two movements. So when you look at the photographs of those early marches in 1965 at the White House and other sites of federal power, almost all of the marchers are white. Because they simply were not doing the work to recruit people who may have already been activists in the Black Freedom Movement and also were queer. And as the 60s wore on, and as individuality became more and more important, and as a new generation of activists began saying, you're excluding people, Frank Kameny wasn't able to adapt. He didn't realize that he was holding back the movement. It took Stonewall to really begin an influx into what was then called the homophile movement and revolutionizing it and expanding it in size and scope to make it so it wasn't just a movement for white men wearing suit and tie, but instead a movement for everyone. It shows us not just the successes of how progress is made, but also the failures and how we can learn from the mistakes of the past. As a matter of principle, because he was so certain that he was a victim of prejudice and he could not afford to let that stand, he really lived a life of poverty. I became interested in Frank Kameny's story when his name popped up as a related figure after I watched the film Milk about Harvey Milk. And I realized this was one of the grandfathers of the movement for queer liberation, and yet there wasn't a book written about him. Kameny died during the Obama administration, and fortunately he did receive the recognition and the thanks, but also the apology from the federal government for what it had done to Frank. When President Obama repealed Don't Ask, Don't Tell, when he signed the legislation, Frank Kameny was there, and he actually received the pen that President Obama used to sign that piece of legislation. Shows how long progress takes and how much work goes into creating change. We still don't have an Equality Act, which is necessary to ensure that the decision is applied consistently despite future administrations. And so we have to keep fighting, but also learn from the mistakes of people like Frank Kameny and ensuring that we're not leaving people behind in that process.
Before I begin, I did want to stress how much thought I put today into my choice of wardrobe. I thought about my bisexual pride t-shirt. I thought about my Out Falcons t-shirt for BGSU, and I decided, since it's especially a family one, to go with Slinky. It's fun for a girl and a boy. Every 4th of July, from 1965 to 1969, a small but determined group of activists marched in Philadelphia outside of Independence Hall. Usually numbering 3 or 4 dozen people, they thought it appropriate to use Independence Day and the birthplace of the United States to dramatize their cause. Frank Kameny was usually among them. Marching in the sweltering heat in a shirt and tie, he was one of the few activists of the period who was willing to speak to the press and openly identify as gay. One newspaper account from 1967 noted how orderly they were. Nearby police openly said they didn't mind these protesters since they never caused trouble. Passers-by on the street sometimes stopped and stared, wondering if they read those picket signs correctly. Some turned to friends or family members pointing and say, wait, are they all, without finding the word to finish that sentence? The participants in these marches mostly remained silent, directing questions to a designated spokesperson to avoid conflicting messages. They handed out leaflets detailing the many forms of legal discrimination that LGBTQ plus people faced at that time. In the late 1960s, every state but Illinois had a law on the books criminalizing gay sex. Some defendants faced up to 5 years in prison if convicted. There were no legal protections in any significant area of life, from employment to housing to education. Police entrapment and violence was rampant. Until 1958, post offices could censor LGBTQ plus materials from the mail. Homosexuality was still listed as a psychiatric disorder until 1973, and newspapers regularly used terms like pervert and deviant when referring to queer folks. Amid all of these restrictions, however, queer folks fought and loved and lived their lives. Some lived openly, others in the closet. Some tried to hide or change themselves to fit society's expectations. Others openly questioned these norms. Some, like those marching in Philadelphia, thought that the best way to change people's minds on their rights was to present themselves as respectable, normal Americans who simply wanted to live their lives without fear or retaliation for their identities. Others fought back quite literally in Los Angeles and Milwaukee and San Francisco, or engaged in sit-ins in Philadelphia and Washington, D.C. What we now consider the first official Pride celebrations came on the first anniversary of Stonewall, the rebellion against police harassment that started on June 28, 1969 in Greenwich Village. Those marches were more than the culmination of a tumultuous year after patrons at the Stonewall Inn fought back and resisted arrest. It amplified the calls that had been gathering steam for years from queer activists, calls for people to come forward and challenge a society that tried to make them invisible. Coming out was not new. UCLA professor Abigail Sagai points out that it was used within gay and lesbian communities in the early 20th century to signal people entering into queer society the way that debutantes entered into straight society as teenagers. But now, coming out was also about visibility. It became a step in fighting back against shame. Pride celebrations became opportunities for queer communities to come together in public, celebrate their identities, and connect with other people like them. And when those first Pride celebrations took place in the 1970s, newspapers, politicians, and others took notice. Throughout that period, they asked why there seemed to be so many more gays and lesbians. It took them a little while to actually think about the B and the T in LGBT. They accused these movements of recruiting children and promoting immorality. They pushed for new restrictions, attempting to bar them from jobs as teachers and restrict their ability to meet in public. In the 1990s, they held fast against allowing openly queer folks to serve in the military and ultimately pushed the federal government to define marriage as between one man and one woman. I would add that during those years, as all of that continued, you not only had the ongoing battles in the courts, like we saw in the film. The first lawsuits around marriage equality were in the early 1970s. But pride also took on a new meaning, or an evolving meaning. In the 1980s, pride was also about letting the public know about the growing crisis of HIV/AIDS. It was about mourning our lost ones, about educating one another about how to avoid this disease. Pride became, in and of itself, a political rallying point, a way of bringing together people from across this spectrum around a host of issues. And perhaps another time we can go into more detail about some of the disagreements within pride, about what should be our focus. Should we be devoting all of our energy to this versus that? Now, other people can stand here and give a better overview of this history, detailing how pride was created, how it evolved over time. I can only stand here as someone who came out 26 years ago and wished I could have done it sooner. I didn't know any openly LGBTQ folks in my hometown growing up. I saw more straight characters pretending to be gay on television than I saw gay characters. Of course, bisexuals like me were almost never mentioned. I heard plenty of people use terms about gay people as an insult against me. And in turn, I use those same words against other kids my age. But in so many ways, I was also quite lucky. When I came out for the first time to my friend Stephanie, late on the night of April 30th, 1997, she listened and told me she loved me. When I told my aunts, they continued to love me like a son. When I met the woman I ultimately married, she understood this was an important part of my life and supported me in embracing that identity. Later today, after our in-person service ends, we're going to walk outside and raise our new pride flag. Thank you, Megan, for making that happen. Because not everyone is as fortunate as I have been. When we celebrate pride, when we raise that flag, we remember those who could not live their lives as they wished. We remember those who never lived to see some of the amazing advances of recent years. We remember those who still live in fear because of the very real threats they face. We remember those who have been cast from their homes and family, who seek what we say we want to offer: a kind word, a warm face, a place to be valued and loved. That is what activists like Frank Kameny fought to create for everyone, everywhere. It seems fitting then that Frank died on October 11th, 2011, National Coming Out Day. I hope that the day of his sunset represented another queer person's sunrise. With that, I would like to hear from you. And trust me, it felt weird writing something this short, because for me, this is short. But I would love to hear from you in terms of, it could be your reactions to the video, reactions to what I said, but also the questions I posed at the very beginning. Are there topics within this very broad topic of LGBTQ rights and identities that you would like us to talk about more in a later service and give more detail about? But also, are there things that we should be doing that we're not already doing as a congregation to help support these folks in our congregations and in our communities who really need our help right now? So, is there anyone who would be brave and like to begin? I will use the microphone.
Anybody? Who wants to go first? Any kids? Steve.
There we go.
We're talking about Pride Month. We're talking about LGBTQ pride. If you have anything to say about it.
Okay. Hello.
Hello.
I'm perfectly happy with everybody and however they want to live their lives, but something I struggle with are the pronouns of them and they, because it intrudes on basic sentence structure and understanding for me. When someone refers to themselves as they, I find it kind of confusing. Maybe I just need to get used to that.
Language always evolves, so yeah, there's always things that it takes getting used to. And I would say even, within LGBTQ communities, there are some folks who don't like certain terms. There are, especially I would say, some older folks who hate the term queer. There are also some folks who prefer the word queer for themselves, but think that we use it too broadly. So it takes time to adjust. When it comes to the use of they, them, some people, again, who know much more about this than I, have documented that it has been used as a singular non-gendered pronoun for about 400 years. And I think there just came a point where it got pounded into our heads as, this is how we use it, this is the only way we use it, even though many of us used it in our everyday languages the same exact way. But yeah, it does take some getting used to.
What does it mean? I don't even understand what that means.
Did you want to address that? Just here.
Well, we have two respondents, so should we start with Katie and then? Oh, okay.
Either one? Angeles?
Okay. So I actually use she, they pronouns. I have at certain points in my life also used they, them pronouns. And so they can, I guess I'll start by saying anybody can use any pronouns, and that doesn't necessarily mean that they are a specific gender identity. Someone could identify as non-binary and use she, her pronouns, or he, him pronouns. Someone could identify as a woman and use they, them pronouns, or even he, him pronouns. They, them is generally a more, what it is more accepted as, like a non-specific type of pronoun. And I guess she, her generally kind of has a more feminine connotation to it, and he, him would have a more masculine connotation to it. And a way to think, actually Tom kind of talked about this for a second, that we have used they, them in the English language for a very long time. Like if you think about when you're talking about a general idea of a person, you're like, oh, if someone were to go to the store and then they picked up an apple and then they went and checked it out and they took it back to their house, you would talk like that all the time. You just don't realize you do, maybe, or maybe some people do realize that they do. It's just about like being aware and conscious of that you do know how to use those pronouns. And if you mess up people's pronouns, it's okay, as long as you're not doing it on purpose, and they're just going to correct you and just like keep trying to get it right. So, yeah.
Okay. Yes? Okay. So gender generally exists on a spectrum. So on one end, I mean, in like traditionally you would think, on one end there's women, one end there's men, and there's this whole spectrum in between. So they, them, people, people who identify with they, them pronouns, generally, in my experience, I've got a lot of friends who use they, them pronouns, don't see themselves as man or woman or male or female. They just kind of exist in that in-between area on that spectrum. And it can be hard to use they, them pronouns in a singular context. But generally, like the vast majority of people who use they, them pronouns or different pronouns from how you would think they would use those pronouns, how they present, are generally very understanding. They're not gonna be upset with you for using the wrong pronouns. They'll correct you, but they won't be hostile towards you. So.
Why do you use both words? Why not just say them or they? Choose one. Why do we have to use both of them? What's the point? What's the point?
Like general grammar, I guess. Like
Grammar, like they as a subject and them.
Or
as a
just
Right.
choose one that you're going to use instead
Right.
of making us do they, them, or she,
Right.
they.
You would have to have them for the direct object.
right, you're not using them both at the same time.
Like I and me, I hit John, John hit me.
Yeah, it's like when you use she, her, you just use them in different contexts.
I hit him. You have to have,
Right.
You have to have we all,
This is getting way too
no,
complicated.
we all.
It can be
it's just language.
confusing.
It's just language. In every language, you have to learn the nominative case and the
I was going to say it's also, I mean, think of when if I were referring to my wife, if I were referring to my wife, might say she and I went out to dinner last night, or I could say I had to pick up something at the store for her. I'm not using those pronouns at the same time. Just when you say they, them, it's very much conditional. Okay, what is the situation? Where would it be appropriate to say they versus them? Yeah, you're not going to use them at the exact same time. Same with the he, him, with she, her, or any of the other neopronouns that have been developing. Oh.
I just wanted to say that my daughter came out as bisexual at 11, and I thought that was early. I mean, I accepted it, but I also said, just so you know, it could be that you're feeling this. I'm not sure you understand it. But I had a journey growth with her, and she prodded me into places I wouldn't have gone otherwise. And I thank her for that journey. But one of the things along the way is that a lot of her friends have gone through many gender identities and trying to figure out who they are. And the pronouns are part of that. And I get it wrong a lot. And they are always very gracious, and they just remind me gently. And so I've started almost like exclusively using they, them in a school setting, because there's so many people that do identify differently. And it's been an adjustment for me, because I was an English major. And I thought, I think plural all the time. So it was an adjustment, but I will tell you that, I assumed that in the area that we live in, Canton, Michigan, which is suburban and fairly diverse, that people would just accept, that we were at a point that people would accept their children for who they are. And I find out that that's not the case. My daughter has told me many times that her friends really appreciate that her father and I give them a welcoming space where they can be whoever they want to be, and we love them no matter what. And so it's really important that we as a community, if it's in your heart to support kids that are queer, to let them know that you're there for them in whatever capacity you can be there, because they still don't have that support in a lot of places. And one of the things I loved about how you framed out all that is
people are on their own journeys. And a big part of this is giving people the room to figure out, well, what is right for me? I talked about Jack coming out before, and currently he uses he and they pronouns. And, if you ask him why, he's like, because I'm 18 and I'm still figuring stuff out. And he kind of wants the room to be able to do that, and he should have that. So I think part of it comes down to, if we gave people the room to explore that a bit more, then it would be a little bit of an easier process for many.
Figure out how to pronounce ZE and ZHEM.
Correct pronunciation of ZE or ZE. What was the other one? ZEM. Any guidance? Those are non-binary pronouns. Again, sort of somebody who doesn't identify with he, him, she, her, or even they, them. They might.
I need a dictionary.
Yeah, I mean, and it's always changing.
Very precise.
Yeah. It's really similar to, anytime you learn any kind of new information, right? You're just adding to your vocabulary, you're adding to your existing knowledge. It can really enrich your ways of navigating the world. But I've heard those words pronounced several ways. Does anybody have any definitive advice on?
Definitive, no. Because I've heard people do it more like zim or like zim, and it varies so much from person to person in terms of the pronunciation that I usually would just ask, how would you like me to pronounce that? But I have not heard as much use of some of the neo-pronouns recently. I think I've heard much more with they, them in recent years, whereas I think I heard much more with ze, them, maybe 5 years ago.
Sorry, I'm gonna sit because I actually
Sure.
wanted to, on the topic of all of the pronouns and the way that they evolve and the way that people learn new pronouns and learn how to use them. What you just said, Tom, is, I think, really interesting, because I think we can't forget that we always have to remember to listen when somebody is telling you who they are. And we listen not just for the basic information, but we listen so that we can understand how they express themselves and how they would like to be addressed. And we can't gain that understanding unless we're willing to listen, like really listen, for their pronouns, for their pronunciation. And instead of clouding our minds with, well, wait a minute, right? Which, when you're having your own internal dialogue, it blocks your ability to listen. And so listening is so important when you have any interaction, right? Just listening to each other fully can really help with some of these. So if you're not sure how to pronounce somebody's pronouns, like you just said, Tom, they're going to tell you, but you have to listen.
And usually if you ask, people are actually very pleased.
Right.
Rather than, they assume if you're asking, it's because you care about what is important to them, about who they are.
Yeah.
So what I'm hearing is that at some point we should have a service about both trans and non-binary identities and talk more about that.
That sounds like a great idea.
Yes.
When I listen to this conversation and when I hear people my age usually have the reaction to all of this that it's just, oh, come on, this is just silliness to do all this. The way I finally think of it, after listening to it for 5 or 6 years of my life that I've heard it, is that when I went away to college, I thought that gay people were something pretty akin to the bearded lady in the circus and a freak. I didn't realize that half had people I knew, I was in music from the time I was real little and admired, were gay. And I just look at this as just an evolving thing of isn't it wonderful that we're talking about any of this in public and that people are being who they are rather than in my college was a part of Princeton University. And there were only 300 people that graduated from Westminster Choir College basically every 4 years. And so about 25 to 35% of them, I would say, were gay. They were organists, and about 90% of male organists seem to be gay. We don't know why that is. But here I was in this school full of people that had a huge percentage of them were gay, and my conception of that was that was some kind of a freak and an awful aberration. And that's where we were in 1965. And to hear us discussing how we're going to communicate these ways that people are and hear and see that people can be who they are instead of trying to marry some woman, unsuspecting woman, and never have a good relationship with her because we're really gay. That was the prominent thing that was a horrible thing. And instead, here we are discussing what these pronouns are, and I think it's wonderful.
So what I'm also hearing is Angeles and I will present on queer folks in the arts and
No pressure.
and why we gravitate. I will say we should probably stop the discussion there just so that we can move on time-wise. I know we like to get out in a timely manner. So I want to thank you all for that, and this is something we will be coming back to. So don't worry, this is not a one-off chance. Go ahead, Ted. Now we pass our offertory baskets. Visitors, we welcome you to donate cash or via our PayPal link using the QR code on the slide. Please note that what predominantly supports MVUUC are annual pledges by our members and friends. The yellow cards located in the pockets on the back of the chairs are used to indicate the support and can be placed in the offertory basket. We encourage anyone that believes in our mission to consider becoming a member and to pledge support. Please email news, that's NEWS, @mvuuc.org if you are interested in learning about the benefits of being a member and how to pledge. Now is the time for the sharing of joys, concerns, and milestones. Tina.
Let's take a minute and be quiet together.
I was tempted for our closing words to go with RuPaul, who once said, "We're all born naked and everything after that is drag." But instead, I'm going to go with comedian and actress Margaret Cho. If public figures came out of the closet, then the LGBT kids who saw them on TV would feel safe before they even knew why they felt dangerous. Maybe if enough people came out of the closet, gay kids would never feel dangerous. Maybe we could have a world where we could all just live. We may not all agree, but why can't we just all live? Please join me in reading the words from Maddie Cefantis for extinguishing our chalice that can be found in your order of service or in the Zoom chat box. We extinguish this flame, but we keep its light in our hearts with its message of love and justice, taking it outside these walls to the world we live in until we are together again. Now is the time for announcements. I have a feeling we have one online announcement from Lisa. It's coming, blood drive. June 24th, what does it start at 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. Sign-ups online if you want to help, contribute food, et cetera, et cetera. You all know the drill by this point. And last I heard there were plenty of slots available for those who did wish to donate. So please get in touch with Lisa if you need help with that. Beyond that, any other announcements today? Anti-Racist Book Club, for anyone who is interested, 7 p.m. on Tuesday. Please contact Megan Ranciere if you have any questions about that. We are reading South to America by Imani Perry. David.
The mustard greens are so great. So anybody who wants to check out the garden with me after service, I'll be going out there. So yeah, please, I'd love to show you.
For folks online, if you did not hear that, please come get mustard greens. They are growing well and we are eager to share. No other updates? All right. And after our closing song, we invite you all to stay for coffee hour. Our closing song today is Let It Be a Dance.